say OSHA compliant hazard communication standard training, you may think,
well, that sounds boring.
Please stop talking to me. If I zone out for the entire thing, does it still count? But there's more to this OSHA standard than an attention-grabbing title. A lot more. In the United States, we as consumers have become much more discerning about what's in the products that we buy. This is true when it comes to food, home improvement, and cosmetics. But when it comes to hazardous substances in the workplace, we tend to be a little bit more casual.
Get her done!
I'm Rachel Walla with Ally Safety, and in today's video, we're going to talk about the Hazard Communication Standard and why it matters to you and your health. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Have you ever been eating junk food and you start to get suspicious that it's just a little bit too good to be natural? So you start looking at the ingredients on the package, and slowly you start to comprehend that nothing in this package has come in contact with nature. Except for maybe corn, and that was like 3 processing facilities ago. So you start Googling the ingredients, and pretty soon you're an expert on things you can't even pronounce. Most of us as consumers are getting much more discerning about what we eat. But eating is only one of the ways that we can get exposed to hazardous substances. There's also inhalation. Inhalation is how we get exposed to things like asbestos, silica, and of course now coronavirus. There's also absorption through the skin, which a lot of people tend to forget about. But remember, if you can get a dose of nicotine through the skin, or birth control, or vitamins, it's just as likely that you can get a toxic exposure through your skin. Or injection. Injection happens when we get exposed to a hazardous substance through a break or a cut in the skin, or when a hazardous or sharp object breaks the skin's barrier and we get exposed to whatever was on that object. A classic example of this is needle sticks in medical facilities. And lastly, back to ingestion. Chances are, if you're eating lunch in a contaminated workplace or with dirty hands, you are most likely ingesting some of whatever it is that you work with. When it comes to hazardous substances in the workplace, we tend to leave that all up to our employer, despite the fact that our own actions have huge implications on our own safety and health. And what's even more interesting is that we as employees only gained the right to know about the hazardous substances in our workplace in the 1980s. Before that, the work world was pretty suspect. You see, in 1983, OSHA implemented the Hazard Communication Standard. This was also known as the Employee Right to Know Act.
But I want to talk to you about how we inspect for compliance with our Hazard Communication Standard for construction. We do that on every inspection now, no matter what, because we want all employers and employees to know the hazards of the chemicals at their work sites.
The point of this act was for employees to be informed about the hazardous substances that they're working with and be protected from those substances.
Most managers and workers don't know as much as they should about the chemicals they work with.
It's also the same standard that gave us things like safety data sheets, or SDSs, and outlined how hazardous materials have to be labeled.
Research hazardous chemicals for yourself. I think you'll agree that minimizing the risk of employee exposure to hazardous chemicals will result in a healthier, more productive workforce.
This was a huge step forward in workplace safety. Now, if you're like a lot of people I know, you may be thinking, well, that's great, but have you ever tried to read an SDS? Not only are they boring, but you practically need a degree in chemistry to understand what they're trying to tell you. Well, I've got good news for you there too. Remember when we talked about the Hazard Communication Standard being the Employee Right to Know standard? Well, back in 2012, the US implemented what's known as the Globally Harmonized System. It was a really good thing for workplace safety, because although we got the right to know from the Hazard Communication Standard, this actually more gave us the right to comprehend. What I mean by that is they made SDSs and chemical labels so much easier to understand than they had been previously. So today, you don't need an advanced degree to understand what an SDS is saying. It's easy. There's super simple pictograms, easy to understand labels, and the SDSs are organized in 16 sections that are much easier to interpret. The GHS improved how we communicate the hazards of substances. The best change, at least in my opinion, was the use of pictograms. These are 9 symbols that communicate about the hazards a material might present. I like them because they're simple and easy to interpret at a glance, no matter what language you speak. Now here's what the 9 pictograms mean. And just a heads up, this will probably be important to know at some point in the future. As you can imagine, this pictogram is for health hazards. It includes the following types of dangerous substances: carcinogens, mutagenicity, reproductive toxicity, respiratory sensitizers, target organ toxicity, and aspiration toxicity. The flame symbol covers a few different hazards, like, as you would expect, flammables, pyrophorics, self-heating substances, substances that emit flammable gases, self-reactives, and organic peroxides. Now, this next one looks very similar to the flammable pictogram. The difference here is that the flame is over an O, which stands for oxidizer. This pictogram you've probably seen before because it was used long before the GHS was around. It indicates corrosion, and it'll be found on substances that can cause skin or eye burns, eye damage, or corrosion to metals. This one does not indicate a surprising substance. Now, this pictogram you'll want to pay special attention to because it's probably the least intuitive of them all. The exclamation point indicates a variety of hazards that include irritants to both the skin and the eyes, skin sensitizers, acute toxicity, narcotic effects, respiratory tract irritation, and those substances that are hazardous to the ozone layer. Made it this far? Good. The rest is pretty easy. This one is exactly what you would expect. It indicates substances that are explosive, self-reactive, or organic peroxides. This one may look like a corn dog to some of you, but the gas cylinder pictogram actually indicates gases under pressure. Now, the skull and crossbones does not indicate this is the pirate substance. It indicates a substance that is acutely toxic or even fatal, meaning it's severely toxic. Lastly, this is an environmental toxicity indicator. It indicates a substance that has aquatic toxicity. And those are the 9 GHS pictograms. Next time you're using a hazardous substance, whether at work or at home, check them out on the label of the substance to get the information that you need to know about hazards of exposure.